Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my How to Pick a Running Back video series. So in part 1 we talked about how to find the top plays at running back each week by using some simple tools you can find for free online. But what I didn't touch on was taking player salary and receptions into consideration, which is something you really need to consider when finding the best dollar for dollar plays in cash games. So let's just get right into it. So I'm going to talk about 3 running backs this week that are high on the list of everything we talked about in part 1. High run point share, good red zone carries, good amount of snaps, good amount of rushes. We're just looking for players who, as I stated in part 1, who have this sort of 3-4-headed monster of statistics that we like for running backs. So these are the running backs we're going to talk about. Doug Martin, who I talked about in part 1 and told you why I like him this week. Also, Jonathan Stewart, another guy I talked about in part 1, also has a lot of things going for him. And then one guy I didn't talk about was David Johnson, who's 4,300. His team's also high on run share, and he doesn't have that issue of the quarterback taking some of that. Carson Palmer doesn't run the ball at all, so that's positive for him. He's a guy who gets red zone rushing attempts and actually red zone passes, which is rare for a running back, and is getting a lot of offensive snaps. So the first thing I'm going to look at is salary differences. So the one thing that pops out is that Doug Martin is 6,200 and Jonathan Stewart is 5,800, which are pretty similar salaries. They're about 6,000. And David Johnson's only 4,300. So if we say that hitting salary value is getting 3 times the salary in fantasy points, you can see how big of a difference the salary makes. Doug Martin and Jonathan Stewart have to get about 18 fantasy points in order to quote-unquote hit value, while David Johnson only has to get about 13. So that's a huge difference right off the bat. So I'm just going to say right now, I would say just given only this, it's pretty clear to me that David Johnson is actually a better play for cash games than Doug Martin, Jonathan Stewart. And keep in mind, I'm taking ownership percentage into account, and I'm not talking about GPP specifically here. I'm just talking about value. So David Johnson's probably going to be played a lot tonight, and I'm not sure exactly what you should do with that in GPPs. But if we're talking about a dollar for dollar standpoint, I think it'd be really hard to make an argument that David Johnson is not better than Stewart and Martin, because he actually rates really highly on everything. This run point share actually is probably comparable to Martin and Stewart, given he doesn't have a running QB, and he does just as well as them as everything else. So I'm going to say, since we're considering price, I would say that David Johnson is just better. So I'm going to put David Johnson as my number 1 running back for Thursday through Monday contest. Now, the question is, Doug Martin and Stewart, who are similar prices, how do we decide which we like better? So one other tiebreaker we can use is receptions, and it's actually really easy and simple to predict receptions in my opinion. I mean, there's variance in it, but it's pretty easy to just figure out how theoretically how many balls they're going to catch. So one thing we can just look at is we're 12 games in the season, 13 games in the season. So we can just look at their previous games. So if you look at Martin's previous games, we see a couple 1 reception games, which isn't good, but we do see a 4 reception game, 3 reception game, a 5 reception game, a couple of 2 reception games. So I'm going to say his receptions per game is probably at about 2. And so if we look at Stewart, who is right here, you see something pretty similar. He has 3 receptions per game the last couple of games, but he also has some 1s and 0s here. He also had a 4 reception game against Jacksonville. I would probably say they're going to catch about the same amount of balls, about 2 and some change receptions per game, just based on that statistic. But another thing we can look at as well is how favored their team is, because running backs usually get more receptions if their team is down, because it means they have to pass more, and they have to pass more to the running back, and that means more receptions. So we want a team. If we're trying to find a running back that's going to catch those balls, we want him to be on a team that might be down in the game. So if you look at Carolina versus Tampa Bay, Carolina is favored by 7.5, while Tampa Bay is only favored by 3.5. So Vegas is basically telling us, well, Tampa Bay could be down in this game. Carolina almost certainly is not going to be in the second half, but it's possible, it's just very unlikely. So I think in terms of receptions, the edge goes a little bit to Doug Martin here because he's a little more likely to be playing from behind, although it's not terribly likely. And that means that it's more likely he's going to have a 3, 4, 5 catch game. So if we're going to have a tiebreaker between Stewart and Martin, I would say that I like Martin a little better and rank him number 2 and probably Stewart number 3. Although I'm not going to lock these guys in these rankings right now because injuries can make a difference. For example, if CJ Anderson is out, I actually could envision liking Ronnie Hillman quite a bit, as Denver has a pretty high run share, that of about 10, and they have a really great matchup against Oakland. So this wasn't the best week to do this comparison, just because salaries are so close for most running backs. So it's really just sort of a ranking of who do you like the best. I mean, most people are in this 6,200 to 5,000 range. But I did just want to illustrate how I use salaries and receptions to further decide, once I have my top plays, who are the real best values. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like this video if you actually liked it, and subscribe if you like these video series, because it helps me out quite a bit. All right, thanks for joining me, and good luck with your lineups.